Well, hello. Good afternoon from the United Kingdom. Good morning to you in the United States of America. Bonjour, buongiorno, guten tag, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. My name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in London, and I'm going to be your host for this half-hour session, the title of which is Towards a Post-COVID Economic Rebound. And the essay question we have been set, which I'm sure with our superb panel, we will answer to your total satisfaction in the next 30 minutes, is what strategies should Atlas Network partners be championing to create inclusive prosperity and social resilience in the wake of the pandemic and shutdowns? Just before I introduce our panel, a couple of housekeeping points. I'm sure all of us are very familiar with Zoom now, but please do use the chat function to make your observations, ask any questions. We've only got 30 minutes, so I probably won't be able to get to all of you, but if I see a gem of a question, I will put it to our panelists. And because time's so short, for those of you who have not yet visited the IEA virtual booth here at this virtual conference from our perspective, please visit afterwards, because we're going to carry on the conversation there with our three panelists at the IEA booth, and I'll make sure that we send you the link to that as well. So if your question isn't raised in this formal session, come and join us to continue the conversation afterwards. Let me introduce our fantastic panel. Guillermo Peña is chairman and co-founder of Foundation Eléutera. Forgive my appalling Spanish accent, Guillermo. I am bilingual, but the only two languages I speak are English and American. Guillermo's academic background is in political science and economics, focused on public choice and political risk management for investment in Central America. Privately advises companies entering or expanding in the Central American region and structures new investment projects. He's also the managing partner for Blackbeard Media Group, a digital marketing and brand strategy agency founded in 2016. Warm welcome to you, Guillermo. I'm also joined by Jennifer Stefano, the Chief Innovation Officer and Vice President at the Commonwealth Foundation. She oversees development, communications, and long-term strategic planning. Prior to joining the foundation, she served in numerous leadership roles at Americans for Prosperity and the Americans for Prosperity Foundation. She's an Emmy-nominated former TV reporter and anchor, spent most of her career in the private sector, putting to work her business degree from Villanova University, and has spent the last decade advocating for public policies that maximize human flourishing and individual freedom. In 2015, she was named one of the Claremont Institute's Lincoln Fellows. And last but by no means least, I'm joined by Alexander Scuras, the president of KEFiM in Greece, studied marketing at the American College of Greece and political administration at George Washington University. He served in key positions in national election campaigns in Greece, as well as in the United States of America. Before becoming president of CDC, he served for 6 years as deputy director of international relations at the Atlas Network itself in the US. Welcome to my three panelists. Welcome all. As I said, we should be able to knock this thorny little problem on the head pretty quickly. And Alexander, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to start on a fairly pessimistic analysis from a freedom-loving perspective, but we will build to an optimistic crescendo in the next 30 minutes or so. And Alexander, I want to start with you to ask how much do freedom lovers have to fear here? We have seen intrusions into our private lives and a level of state intervention in democratic and free societies across the world that would have been considered completely unimaginable without a pandemic on this scale. These are dark, dark days for freedom. Would you not agree with me, Alexander?
Yes, on the one hand, thank you, Mark. And also, hi, everybody. It's great to be at Liberty Forum again, even though we're doing it through this online platform, but at least we are doing it, and it's lovely so far. So thank you, Atlas, for doing that, for putting together this amazing event, and for bringing all the Friends of Liberty together from around the world. I'm in lockdown Athens right now, so I'm at home. And, you know, the violations to our freedoms are significant, and we should never take that lightly. It's not something that is commonsensical. It doesn't make sense from many points of view. But on the other hand, there is sufficient justification so far from many governments for the restrictions they're putting. And most of it has to do with the spread of the virus. And, there are many factors that governments take into account when it comes to the measures they're imposing. For example, in Greece, the biggest problem, which to me makes the most sense when it comes to the restrictions they're putting on our freedom, is that our government-run healthcare system, it would not be able to tolerate over a specific amount of COVID cases per day. And this creates nightmare scenarios of people dying in the streets or have no access to healthcare whatsoever. And whenever it comes to significant issues like threats of life or to health, big government gets extra courageous, let's put it that way, and they feel more comfortable in violating our freedoms. I want to point out that I'm not very scared for the future of this whole situation, because there's no political support for these measures that they're putting down. Lockdowns are not celebrated by the people. Everybody hates them, even those who reluctantly follow the guidelines. And this brings to mind, if we even take the road to serfdom in mind, from a certain level onwards, in order for the road to serfdom to materialize, governments need to have the backing of the people, which does not seem to be the case right now. Everybody hates the lockdowns. Some accept them as they come, but others, are not very enthusiastic about it.
Alexander, thank you. Jennifer, let me come to you. What do you think of the scale of intrusions into individual liberty that we've witnessed? Alexander points out that you might be a kind of freedom-loving person and even accept some of them in the case of a national emergency, but haven't we seen big government get even bigger? I mean, we're approaching obese government now, aren't we, Jennifer?
Yeah, so what's interesting and what happened in the United States is that certainly the government has been very intrusive, even so much as going to say, what is a life-sustaining business? Well, in a market-based economy, all businesses are life-sustaining because the amount of value you add determines whether you eat or not. So, for the government to make and call those shots for a pandemic seems rather unrealistic. But may I be that relentless American optimist and point out a couple of things: that very rarely in life do we have a disruptor of this nature. And I'm not happy it happened. I'm not happy people were hurt, but that certainly awakens the world to what is usually creeping incremental takeovers of our freedom, stealing of our freedom, rather than, in America, where the government is solely designed to protect our freedom. And that alone is its only job. So you have this moment where there's an awakening. And I've been pleased by some of the, you see some civil disobedience, you see a real challenge to some of this overreach. And I think it's very important. And the way in America that has really been magnified, there's two key ways. Number one, if you talk broadly about the shutdown of businesses, people might say, yeah, well, people are dying, it's dangerous. But when you talk about their local businesses, okay, America's a very community-based country, right? When you talk about your local hairdresser, when you talk about the local guy, the little guy, it changes the perspective. And I did a lot of polling on this. And when Americans do not like that this government overreach is hurting the little guy. When we did it with healthcare innovations, we have a story of a woman with stage 4 cancer denied a telemed with one of the best cancer hospitals right across the border in New Jersey from Pennsylvania. But that story made a big difference. It helped people realize just how bad and overreaching the government is. And that's where we can't live behind pie charts and percentages. We have to get the stories out of who actually is hurt and show that it's our neighbors and our local community. And I think that is going to make a difference for us to fight back. And we've seen some actual rollbacks of big government here in America because of it.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to come on to those in a moment, but Guillermo, let me come to you. I see Patty Holbein has said in the chat, quoting Ronald Reagan, nothing is more permanent than a temporary government program. Shouldn't liberty lovers be rather concerned that a lot of these intrusions won't automatically melt away when the crisis is over? I mean, a good historical example from the United Kingdom is we brought in national identity cards at the time of the Second World War in order to combat the Nazi menace. We didn't repeal them until 1951, 6 years after the defeat of Germany. It wasn't obvious that there were many Nazi agents or spies between 1945 and 1951 that we needed to root out, but the temporary incursion into freedom stayed in place. Guillermo, what's your take on that?
Well, I think we've definitely seen governments try to do as much as possible, which in many times has been, in many ways, nice to see them fail and fail miserably in some of the cases, especially in some of the developing countries with the cases in very loud cases of corruption, of failed measures, wrong purchases. I mean, we've heard these all around the world coming up. And I think that's, on the bad side is they were supposed to deliver the services that we as taxpayers and residents of the countries ask for, but when they weren't able to do it, the private sector stepped in and solved many of these problems that they weren't able to. But the problems don't stay as just on the COVID factor, but when you bring it down and get close to the nuclear family, which at the end of the day is our closest society or closest part of a community, when you see, at least in our case, as the parent of 2 young kids, and when we still can't send them to school, the not being, the problems that are caused and by not being able to leave the house, by having to now pay for school, do the role of teacher at the same time, and not be able to leave and complete your work with the, in the economy, I think has been a huge problem. I know many countries have opened for schools, many others have not, and we still see that case being a huge problem. So that government anger that's been out there that we've sometimes wanted in order to make better policy that we agree with, I think is stronger now because we have seen them fail. And on the good side is that many of these ministries and secretaries in government have realized that they could function with less than half of the people that they function that we're used to. And as we were talking privately before, not only public sector has found out that they could do that, but private sector as well. So we have found efficiencies in the system that if it wasn't because of this, we weren't able to see.
Alexander, let me come back to you because I want to segue into some more optimism. Jennifer rightly said that those of us in the Atlas Network partners, we're really all in the storytelling business. I mean, those stories are based on high quality research and the facts. We're not in the fib telling business or the lie telling business or the fantasy business, but we need some good stories. What do you think the great story is from the point of view of freedom, Alexander? I mean, we've highlighted certain areas where, although overall the aggregate move has been for a tremendous incursion into personal freedom, there have been some areas where the state has been obliged to liberalize a whole load of regulations I didn't even know existed. Apparently it was illegal in Britain for a restaurant to operate as a takeaway unless it had a separate special license. Well, that regulation's been scrapped. It was illegal to make food deliveries to supermarkets between about midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning. That regulation's been scrapped. Are there some crumbs of comfort, Alexander, in terms of the changing role of the state, or is actually the overall aggregate position pretty damn grim and a lot of it likely to stay?
Mark, I think that, there are many cases where politicians know that some policies work. Sometimes markets work better than any other alternative, but it's not always politically viable to say or do so. Well, the pandemic brought politicians in collision, in a deep collision with reality, and some of their responses are telling. For example, in Greece during the pandemic, we've had the biggest reform had taken place when it comes to digital government services. In case you don't know, in countries like Greece, where corruption has had a 200-year tradition, cutting out the immediate contact between public servants and the general population, whether it is individuals or businesses, can have a dramatic effect, a positive effect on the reduction of corruption. And this is taking place right now in Greece. And these reforms were accelerated because of the pandemic, because still people needed to register their child's birth. I registered my child's birth during the first lockdown. And otherwise it would have taken me 3 or 4 days. We just did it by email. So many positive reforms have taken place in digital governments. Another area that recently took place in Greece is that we passed a new bankruptcy law, which will make, it's much more in accordance with the World Bank's Doing Business Index report, and it prevents Greek companies from becoming, within quotes, zombies that exist for decades because they cannot figure out insolvency. So positive, there has been an area for reform, but the most successful story and the most positive story that we've had was especially obvious during the lockdowns when people were locked in their houses, but somehow goods and services kept coming to them. And this was the miracle of the global supply chains that free markets have built and the free economy has enabled. And this is, for me, could be the start of a compelling narrative from our point of view as to the benefits of free markets in these extreme situations, which I will point out, this narrative is currently missing. And I would like to encourage everyone in attendance here to start thinking together about how we can come up with a very good narrative about this situation.
Well, Jennifer, yeah, I want to take you've made a career as a highly successful broadcaster. Tell us, what's the story we should be telling here?
I mean, look, looking into your country, you know, if I'm looking into America, I'm talking about, and something that all Americans really identify with, and this is sort of a cultural value or virtue, that American ingenuity, right? So at the start of the pandemic, we were terrified that we were going to run out of ventilators, and that was the treatment at the time. Now that's changed, but we were terrified we were going to run out of ventilators. There was no toilet paper, no paper towels, Clorox, and we could talk about the psychology behind that's where we all went and sort of stockpiled, but we did. Today, right, we're still in the midst of the pandemic, right? About 6 months later, and we have more ventilators. I think we're giving a ventilator to every person when we send them their tax bill this year. There are more ventilators now available. There are now the shelves are stocked with paper towels, with toilet papers, with all the goods that were needed. And that's not just American ingenuity. That is that global supply chain. But when you allow people, when you allow humans to solve the problem, they do. And this is, I always say, you know, be careful what you ask for. You ask Americans for help, they're coming to help you. So, and you know, now you have the oversupply, and we can talk about the economics behind that. But also I would point out, you know, I looked at the data in the United States, our charitable giving in the light of this pandemic, and at times where we had some states with 20+% unemployment, that's rivaling the Great Depression, there was increased charitable giving. And in fact, on top of that, so that's the traditional charitable giving in the United States, which gives away more money than any other country. But what I think you'll find in other countries, in your countries, and we finding in America, is that more than 50% of Americans practice what I call market-based charity. We're recognizing that their local businesses were dying and tanking because of heavy-handed government. They jumped in, we Americans jumped in and started spending more money, more of our disposable income on things we didn't need, but that could help our local businesses. Now, that speaks a lot to the human spirit and human flourishing, and explaining that story versus what do you get if you tried to do this through central planning? You get like the Trabants, right? And you have to remind people of that. You have to show them the virtuousness of their local actions. You have to show them that they have it within them, that we need not turn to the government and say, how do we solve this? That we can say, we can solve it, get out of our way. And I think the key thing is not just the public policy, but the mental model behind it of what we truly can see ourselves as being virtuous. And I think we've, you know, in America, we have to remind ourselves that we set up the government, and it's actually we as individuals coming together voluntarily that can solve these problems. And I think the world is rife with examples of this, and we have to put those stories before the policies in order to shrink the government. I think we have a real opportunity here. It's a great disruptor.
Guillermo, I'm interested to hear your narrative as well. I mean, I think some of the contrasts that we've witnessed here in the UK, where we have a largely state-run healthcare sector, but a largely privately run food supply and supermarket sector, it's been the state-run healthcare sector that struggled to get the right protective equipment in the right numbers to the right hospitals at the right time. With the exception of this bizarre run on toilet paper. I mean, I don't know what zombie apocalypse movies everybody's been watching. When the end of days comes, I wouldn't have thought toilet paper's top of the list of what you need to buy. I would have thought it was tinned goods and powdered milk. But even that only lasted a day or two, and I could go into a supermarket here at the height of lockdown, access goods from all over the globe on the shelves, typically available just as they would be in peacetime. Guillermo, what's your view of how we tell a compelling freedom story about this pandemic and how it's been dealt with?
Well, I think the story has been helped a lot in this side by the lockdown, and just showing how many things were unnecessary, or how many things were stopping us from being dissolved or slowing us down. In some cases here, which is part of the area that we're working on is on smoothing out the process for new medicine coming into the region, new technology or new treatments, and because it was everything was pushing papers around for months, but to try to get something in. And besides that, you had to do tests for new medicines that were coming in approved by the FDA or the European system or the Japanese system or wherever. What does a Honduran health system have to say against those? Nothing. So these were unnecessary rules that are that are being discussed now because we have a health situation that allows you to bring these subjects back up. So now you can use the problem to solve bigger problems that we weren't able to solve before. Same thing has happened in the energy sector, where we've been trying to do a market liberalization for 20 years, and although the rules have been passed, we haven't been able to get private large consumers to buy directly from generators and wholesalers. Well, now we're able to get that smoothed out, and it's all digital as well. So like Alex was saying, the digital government was able to move forward much quicker than we've ever seen it before, especially in countries that were not as advanced in that. And on the final note, I'd say another just liberalization process that helped the narrative in education was in homeschooling and digital schooling. We passed a legislation to allow for this to happen in 2013, but it wasn't until 2020 that we get the first school that's approved by the government on homeschooling efforts and that recognizes the homeschooling effort. So we've seen, within all these difficulties, there are pockets of narratives that are very easy to push forward because now there's no other option. It's easy. The ideological debate ends when there's no other option. You have to send the kids to school. So here we go. This is a solution, and good thing we already had in legislation. So I think it's sticking to those narratives where we find the lowest hanging fruits that we've never seen as low as today sometimes.
Alexandra, I want to come back to you. All of the groups in the Atlas network show great courage and alacrity in putting our case without fear or favor. But you mentioned in your opening remarks, Alexandra, that you felt that people were opposed to lockdown, increasingly skeptical about it, can see big government failing. Do you think we'll be tapping into a well of support? I would say here in the UK, there are mixed signals. If you believe the opinion polls, and you just get a polling company to ask people whether they support the lockdown or not, there's overwhelming support when you ask for people's stated preferences. When you see their revealed preferences, they seem to be much more skeptical about complying with every last letter of the law. And do you think this if there is a surge for freedom, at least amongst a certain proportion of the population, is there a danger that freedom lovers in many previously free countries are going to have to become law breakers? Well,
this is one of the questions that, of course, sometimes it keeps us up at night, and especially in this movement and in this group of people, right? Whenever fundamental freedoms are at stake, it's always something to really worry about. In Greece, I will give you an example. We had the first lockdown. It was early March until April. And it was very, very successful in the sense that it really stopped the spread of the virus. And that gave Greece 4 or 5 months of real economic activity, including the tourist season, which is a very important aspect for our GDP. The first lockdown, people reluctantly joined it. They didn't complain a lot. There weren't many violators because we didn't know exactly what the virus was, what it does to us, what are the real survival rates. Everything back then was up in the air. Right now, we know more about the virus. And there's also another important aspect of this, which we should celebrate as a movement. And that's that Pfizer is very close to having the first vaccine, and it was the only one that didn't participate in the government-run warp speed program. So, that's a victory for markets as well. So right now, we know that we have the vaccine coming, and the second lockdown, it doesn't look like the first one. People are not using it, and they're not refraining from going outside. They haven't stopped shopping. They come up with all kinds of excuses to work around it. For example, there was a ban on weddings over 100 people, but certain reception areas were allowed to have up to 200 people at the same time. So I was talking to an owner and I asked him, hey, how do you do this? Like, what's happening? So he said, we have a wedding with 200 people, but what we did was we rented half of our place to the wedding, and the best man from the wedding said he's doing a birthday party on the other half. So there's always workarounds, and if you want to find them, they will figure them out. I think that lockdowns right now have lost their appeal because we know more about the virus, and we have the vaccine coming. And these, I will not say whether this is a right approach or not. I'm not an epidemiologist, and I do not claim to have any specific knowledge on that field. But it's a matter of fact, and I see it in Greece as we're speaking. So right now, the government is very anxious because they haven't managed to restrict the spread of the virus. They're running out of COVID beds, and nobody knows what's going to happen next week.
Yeah. Jennifer, what's your view of the ingenuity that we've discovered? Alexander's given that case of the wedding mixed in with the birthday party. I have to say, as the boss here at the IEA, I've been the Director General here for 10 years, the request that I've received from a staff member that I applauded the loudest was an email that said, "Dear Mark, given the new government rules that pubs in Britain now need to close at 10 p.m. rather than 11 p.m, would you please consider moving the IEA working day from 9 to 5 to 8 till 4, so I have enough time at the end of the working day to still have the same number of hours in the pub?" And there was another great story of a guy who, we can't mix households, so wider families can't get together at Christmas if the present rules prevail. He's decided to set up a very small business, employing, amongst other people, his 84-year-old grandfather. And at lunch on the 25th of December, they're going to hold the company AGM because business meetings are allowed, even if Christmas meals aren't. So, Jennifer, do you think we're finding people with a passion for freedom who are finding workarounds here?
Yes, people get particularly passionate when you take it away from them. And that first statement about the guy with the pub is the most British of British things I've ever heard. I love it. I love the British. So, I tell my children, you'll never make anything foolproof because we fools were so ingenious. And that's just the truth. The government treats us as fools. They create laws and rules and they think they're going to rein in what is the human spirit. It doesn't work, but it never works. Okay. And this is why we have revolutions. This is why we have these clever workarounds, hat tip to the British. It's why we have the United States, right? People getting away and trying to get away and saying, oh, look at this vast wilderness. Great. Let's go deeper into it and find more freedom. I mean, it's just the human spirit is what it is. Governments will not change it. They can, however, protect it and quote unquote harness it by not harnessing it. And I think the most important thing that we must do is not lose the ability to tell that story, to remind people what is best about them and about their abilities to care for one another. So I too did polling, and like I said, I too founded the Commonwealth Foundation. Our polling showed people were broadly supportive of the shutdown until you put the word local in front of everything. Local businesses, local stores, local this, local, and then they were completely against it. When it is personal, all politics is local. You have to bring it home to the personal because people do want to live free, but more often than not, the governments seek to take away our freedom incrementally. And so we have a moment now to point that out. But I think it's going to be very important for us to really drive that and recognize that change is incremental. We want it all rolled back immediately. That won't happen. As you said, in Britain, it took 6 years to get rid of that national ID, but you did get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And I think right now we've had a lot of rollbacks in the United States, at least on regulations, and we've had some heavy-handed stuff, but largely As people economically suffer and you can show their faces and you can show that they are your neighbor or the person you're trying to convince neighbor, this is when you start to put up wins on the public policy front. This is when the politicians have to start listening.
Guillermo, I'm going to have the last word from you. Do you think that the difficult circumstances we've lived under might lead to this yearning for freedom across the world? And is the public perhaps losing sympathy with each passing day? Here in the United Kingdom, I think it's both been the length of it that has led to people being more dubious about lockdowns and government intervention. A few weeks over a nice warm summer, livable with. Now it's running into November, December, and nothing much seems to have changed. And also the complexity of the rules, which have so many different sort of loopholes and contradictions in them. Here in the UK, we have a National Health Service app, which you're supposed to download on your phone. And then the state will apparently tell you whether you've been in contact with anyone who's been tested positive for COVID-19. You'll be unsurprised to know that a massive IT program run by the government has not worked very effectively. And the best joke I saw of it was actually somebody saying, I've downloaded the NHS app on my phone. It tells you if you're within 10 yards of anybody who can actually explain the goddamn rules to you that you're supposed to observe and live by. So what's your take, Guillermo? I'll give the last word to you about how the public might yearn for freedom again and start demanding it.
I think we've seen probably in at least, in Honduras, I'll say for Honduras, in many generations, we have never felt the weight of the state as we did at the beginning of the pandemic. And as we move on, we've seen people figure out those loopholes, those ways around. I mean, I thought I was running away. I snuck out my family from the city and we moved out to a beach property and kept it up for 6 months, and we've never invested more in it because we found that people were doing that same story and leaving their homes to their beach house to live because that was allowed. And we were hosting people every week for 6 months. And it was great. It was safe and we had no cases. So that proved to us that if we did things right, we were able to live with this problem without getting into health problems. And at the same time, providing a place where people could remember what being free and happy was. So we did that. I think that goes out to general population, in which when you start getting rid of that, of being so afraid, not only of the disease, but the authority, then you realize that there's so many more things that you can do on your own that you would otherwise in other conditions ask for the government to help you out. So yes, there should be a push to for this freedom need and this asking for to fix our problems. And I'm going to end on a note that strengthens this, but at the same time has been very hard to deal with. This past week, we were hit with a huge storm in Honduras. About 1.5 million people displaced. A third of our city was underwater, and the government wanted to react, get the economy back up and going. We were supposed to have a holiday for 3 days, so all the emergency systems were ready to help people go out and be, this for the first time in 7 months, that we were going to have the freedom to move around the country without being asked by the police to show your papers that you had a permit to move around. So we were going to move around, and then a storm hits. I mean, you can't even make this up. I mean, for the first time, you get a 30-year storm. The government wasn't ready for it. So they canceled the holiday a day before, 24 hours before. People still couldn't go to the supermarkets because we were on a digit access to the supermarket, and people couldn't prepare for that. So the anger just rose to levels that we had never seen, because people now were only worried with the disease, but they were worried with how were they going to be able to stock up to survive a huge storm. And as you know, the government knocked down the access to the supermarkets. They knocked down the access the restrictions to move around the country. So now all of a sudden we're back into freedom, but people are moving just as much as they were moving before, because we figured out a way on how to do it. We are not worried as much about the authority. Unlike other countries, I have not met anyone who's been fined for moving without a permit, except being held back by the police for a little bit. So the reaction to the civilian reaction to the storm was so big that it overran the government's reaction to the emergency services. And it showed that the government cannot solve all problems, especially these really big ones. This is up to the local community to solve them. The reaction was so big that we don't even know where the government was solving these problems. But we were able to get everyone out of isolated areas. People took out their boats, private boats to save people. So I think that reaction is there. The freedom-loving feeling is there. And most importantly, that now we know that we can take things in our own hands and solve them, which is something that I think many people have forgotten that they were able to do that before.
Guillermo, thank you. I promised you at the outset that our brilliant panel would be able to solve this problem in 30 minutes. I lied, it's taken them 37 minutes, so I'm sorry to have run slightly into the next session. I know some of you will want to go to that next session. If you'd like to continue the discussion on this topic, I've placed in the chat, as has my colleague Adam Barter earlier, a link to the Zoom chat over at the IEA. So if you've got questions or want to contribute to the debate on this topic further, please join us there. Thank you very much for Atlas for putting on this wonderful conference in such difficult circumstances, proving the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well. And thanks for all of the participants for joining us, but my special thanks to Guillermo, Jennifer, and Alex. I look forward to carrying on the discussion at the IEA booth shortly. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.